Hello, and welcome back to learning how to create your own website. My name is Rolando, and today we'll be going over paragraphs and line breaks in HTML. So let's get started. Paragraph tags are container tags. Remember that container tags begin with an opening tag and end with a closing tag. In our example of a paragraph element right here, we can see that we begin with an opening paragraph tag and end with a closing paragraph tag. What do you think that the P inside both of these tags stands for? You guessed it, paragraphs. Whenever we want to visually show text on our web pages, we should be using paragraph tags. Text could be anything such as multiple sentences, phrases, random words, symbols, numbers, or anything like that. In general, a paragraph is a group of multiple sentences related to the same idea or topic or even subject. At the bottom of the screen, we have an example of one paragraph written in HTML. We know that this is only one paragraph because we have one opening paragraph tag, some text nested inside, and then one closing paragraph tag. If you read the text written inside, you'll see that these sentences are actually all related, again, to the same idea, topic, or subject. In this example, let's look first at the left side of the screen where it says input. This is going to be our input HTML code. When we run this code or generate it or execute it, we're going to see it outputted visually on our web page like this on the right side of the screen. Let's break this down line by line. So first, we have our doc type tag. Then we have our opening HTML tag. Nested inside is our opening body tag. Nested inside of our body are three separate paragraphs, or three paragraph elements. We then close out of our code by writing a closing body tag and then a closing HTML tag. When this is ran, we can visually see that it appears just like this on the right side of the screen. But notice that we have empty lines of space on lines 2, 4, and it's a little bit harder to notice, but also line 6. But why is this? It's because every single time we write a paragraph and it's executed, it's going to actually force us to jump 2 lines. So again, if we were to look at our first paragraph right here, we have our first paragraph text written on our first line. Then we end up on the end of our first line, right? Because we just wrote this text. So we're going to actually be jumping 2 lines, or you can think of it as +2 for every single time a paragraph is executed. So if we're on our first line, or at the end of our first line, we go from our first to our second line, and then we jump to the beginning of our third line. Notice how I said beginning, because when we jump lines, we're not just jumping to the middle of a line, we're jumping to the very beginning of each line. So then our second paragraph is outputted, and this text is outputted onto our third line, but then again, all paragraphs force us to jump 2 lines after they're done being written out to our web page. So then we jump from our third line to the beginning of our fourth line, and then to the beginning of our fifth line. For our third paragraph, again, this text is outputted right here. We're at the end of our fifth line, and then we have to jump 2 more times. So we jump to our sixth line, and then to the beginning of our seventh line. In this code, we have 2 paragraphs. Our first paragraph has words separated by 1 space. But then in our second paragraph, we have words separated by different amounts of space, or multiple spaces. So if we were to run this code and output it to our web page, what do you think visually it's going to look like? Do you think our first paragraph is going to look identical to our second paragraph because of the spacing, or do you think they're going to look the same? Well, the answer is that they're going to actually look identical. That may sound weird at first, but you should know that HTML does not care about spacing in our code. What it does care about is special characters that we use to begin and end things in our code. So for example, when we write tags, we have a left angle bracket, an element type, and then a right angle bracket. If you forget one of these important things, then your code's probably not going to function, or there are going to be some errors in your code. So we should always remember when we're beginning things and ending things. Inside of our paragraph, this text is more or less the same. Even though our opening paragraph tag is directly touching this word right here, our capital T in this, when we output this, it's still going to be the same whether we have spacing in between our tag and text or 100 spaces in between our tag and text. You should try experimenting with this on your own. Try adding spaces in between the tags themselves and try adding spaces in between the text and see what happens. Now let's move on to line breaks. Line break tags are empty tags. Note that empty tags are different than container tags because container tags have an opening tag and a closing tag, whereas an empty tag is like a combined opening and container tag that makes up a single tag. So right here in our line break example, we can see, reading from left to right, we have a left angle bracket, BR standing for line break, space, / right angle bracket. That's a little bit hard to remember. Think about the BR as standing for line break, as in the BR in break. We want to use line breaks because they allow us to jump as many lines as we want. So when we write one line break tag, we're actually making us jump to another line ahead, or think about it as breaking ahead. So it's kind of like when you hit the enter key on an essay. When you're writing like a Word document and you hit enter a bunch of times, that's going to break you onto new lines below, or it's going to cause you to jump from the current line that you're on to the next line below. We've seen this example before at the bottom of the screen, but just remember that with all empty tags, and specifically this is our line break tag, we have a left angle bracket, a BR, which is our element type, and then a right angle bracket. The reason why I said just those three things is because those three things are required when we use empty tags. This means that the space and the / are optional. So in some examples moving on, you'll see us be using a space and a / sometimes, and sometimes maybe you'll just see a /, but they all work the same. We should never use line break tags to separate our paragraphs. This is because, again, paragraphs already by default force us to jump 2 lines. Whenever we want to use our line break tags, we should only be using them inside of text container tags. You should know already about header tags. Headers create sections, or they designate bigger pieces on our website, where we can write other text. So inside of a header tag, or nested inside of a header tag, we can actually be writing paragraphs or using paragraph tags. So line breaks can be used inside of paragraphs or also header tags. So right here where we have a single paragraph tag, we see some text that says sincerely, comma, line break, and then some other text. When this is outputted, it's going to look visually like it does on the right side of the screen. So let's break this down just like we did the other code. We have sincerely, comma, line break, which means that we're going to jump from our first line to our second line. And again, not just the second line, but the beginning of our second line. Then Billy Bob is going to get written out to our web page on our second line. Now let's look at a good and a bad example of when we should be using line breaks. In this good example, we see that Billy Bob is written inside of one paragraph. In fact, all of this text is written inside of one paragraph. But Billy Bob has a line break after it, which means that we're going to jump from our first line onto our second line. Then this street address is going to get outputted, and then we have another line break, where this is going to cause us to jump onto our third line. We jump to the beginning of our third line, or again, we break onto our third line. Right here, we have a city name underwater, California, and then a zip code. All addresses are usually gonna look like this. I say that because when you write an address, you usually want to have a name of who you're going to be writing a letter to, or maybe you're going to put your own name on a letter and you're telling the other person where you live, or even like in a text message. So you always start off with your name, you put a street address, and then you put the city, the state, and a zip code. But it's important that we separate these on 3 lines because it just structurally helps us know what we're looking at. Because imagine if we were to write this all on 1 line. If we were to have Billy Bob, then the street address, and then everything else written all in the same line. You might think that that's just one whole street address, but this helps us visually know who lives here, what street we want to see, and then what city, state, and zip code. So when we output this code, we're going to see Billy Bob on our first line. Then again, the line break tag is going to jump to our street address onto our second line. And then we have another line break tag at the end of our second line that's going to cause us to jump onto our third line. Then finally, we have our last line written. And then our final line break is going to cause us to jump from our third to the beginning of our fourth line. Notice though that this line break tag right here does not have a space nor a forward slash in it. This is still going to functionally work just as if it did have a space or a forward slash in it. Again, spaces and forward slashes and empty tags, and in this example, line breaks, are optional. Now let's look at a bad example. So in this example, we see some text written inside of a body tag. But then the text is separated by 2 line breaks. Although this is visually going to work, this is bad because we're not writing text inside of a container tag, specifically inside of a text container tag, like a paragraph or a header. So if we want to fix this, how about we put these 3 lines into 3 separate paragraphs? Because we're using paragraphs, we know that it's going to jump or break onto 2 lines of head. So there'll always be a space in between these separate paragraphs or separate sentences. Now that we reviewed both paragraphs and line breaks, let's do a quick recap of what we just learned. So paragraph tags are container tags, which require both an opening and a closing tag. Then once we write some text inside of our paragraph tags and it gets outputted to our web page, HTML by default is going to force us to jump 2 lines ahead. This is different than line breaks, where with line breaks, they are empty tags, where they only have a single tag that looks like a combined opening and closing tag. Remember again that the space and forward slash and all empty tags are optional. We really want to emphasize that because along the way, whether it's your own code, someone else's code, or some pre-existing code on anywhere on the internet, you might see both where it has a space and a forward slash and some places where it doesn't. But again, it's still going to work. So with line breaks, they allow us to control how many lines of space you want to be jumping ahead or breaking ahead onto. This gives us a lot more control than how paragraphs force us to jump 2 lines. So now that you are more familiar with both of these tags, how about you demonstrate that knowledge in a coding assignment called assignment 1.3 on Replit. Go ahead and try doing that yourself. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.